Good morning. Welcome to Fat in Front of the Camera, Why It Matters. Oh, hello.
Hello.
We're so grateful that you are all here today. I'm Elizabeth Kilpatrick. I'm the Senior Vice President at the Gina Davis Institute, where our motto is, if she can see it, she can be it. I have the pleasure.
All right.
I have the pleasure of being our moderator today, and I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a moment. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we felt it was so important to put this panel together for the Bentonville Film Festival. To start out with, you may have felt uncomfortable reading the word fat in the festival program. You may feel uncomfortable hearing me say that word right now. Fat, fat, fat. It's a word that has had so much incredible power over me for much of my life. Fatty, fatty 2x4, can't fit through the kitchen door. I was surprised at how quickly that childhood taunt came back to me when I started preparing for this panel. And I shouldn't have been, because I heard it so much of elementary school, even after my third grade teacher, Mr. Edwards, who was vastly ahead of his time, cast me as Cinderella in the school play.
What?
So he saw me as Cinderella, but why couldn't anyone else, including myself? And what I learned as I got older was that fat is just a description of a physical attribute. It's like tall or short, blue-eyed or red-headed. It's just a descriptor, it's not a value judgment. And our panelist, Joy Nash, said in an interview something that I thought was great. She said, you only use a euphemism when something is too terrible to talk about. There is nothing right. She doesn't remember saying it, but it was great.
Just pearls of wisdom dropped in.
But there's nothing wrong with being fat. So why do we think there is? Why are we uncomfortable hearing that word? It's because we live in a society that's seeped in fatphobia and anti-fatness, bigotry around people with large body types. People with large body types are both hypervisible and completely invisible at the same time. And that carries through on the small and the large screen as well. Plus-size characters are often depicted as insatiable, immoral, unlovable, and one-dimensional. At the Gina Davis Institute, we look at media representation around 6 different categories, and one of those is body type. In 2020, we did a look back on the most popular programs viewed by children. What we found was that, of course, plus-size characters were vastly underrepresented, but they were also depicted as clumsy, poorly dressed, which what? And losers. Even more astounding is the fact that they were 2 times more likely to be depicted as stupid than their small and medium type body types. So, I think that sort of lays the groundwork for why we're having this discussion today, and we want to talk about how we as storytellers can sort of change the way that we're telling these stories and what's possible in the future for plus-size representation. So with that, I would love to introduce my panelists. This is Ashley Atkinson, who's an actress in The Gilded Age, Mr. Robot, and Black Klansman. She will also be in Gina and Friends tonight at 6 o'clock if you haven't been there. This is Virgie Tovar, who's a contributor to Forbes and the author of You Have the Right to Remain Fat and the Body Positive Journal. This is, and Jackie, some of you may be expecting Jackie Schwartz. She came down ill and wasn't able to attend. So luckily, Adrienne Acevedo-Levitt had messaged me the day before asking about the panel and said, well, if anybody drops out, so we're thrilled to have her. She's an actor, director, writer, and producer. She's had recurring roles in Better Call Saul, Fosse Verdon, The Deuce. She's the founder of Garage Productions, and she's part of an episodic that's also tonight, that's airing tonight at 7 o'clock.
Brownsville bred.
And finally, Joy Nash is an actress who starred in Dietland, Twin Peaks, and Grey's Anatomy. So welcome to our panelists. So this is a question for all our panelists. And Ashley, would you like to go first?
Sure.
What's your personal relationship to the topic?
Oh, sure. I mean, well, I'm fat, which is a starter. And I was always fat. Actually, I think this is, I've had a lot of conversations with people that sort of have this thing where I was overweight as a child, but the messaging of the time, I grew up in the 80s, and the messaging of the time made me feel much more alien than I was. I look at those pictures now and I say, I was fine. I'm not sure. And it's not that being, there was so much interference with my fatness as a child that there was no way I couldn't take that messaging away that I was broken in some meaningful way. And I wanted to be an actor. And my parents protected me from that dream for a very long time because they were very scared of what that would mean for me, what that would look like, because there was nothing on their screens that led them to believe that that was a possibility for me. I graduated acting school in 2003 and happened into this weird time where all of a sudden there were these projects that had fat female characters in them that were romantic partners to the leads. And there was just this surplus of the, not surplus, comparatively, there were like 4 of them in the world. But we were like, that's 4 more than there's ever been. So great.
Yeah.
And so I did a play by Neil LaBute called Fat Pig. And a show called Rescue Me that had a similar storyline, and that was all sort of 2004, 2005. And I look back at those roles, and I feel like we have, in some way, I think, pushed, as fat people and as fat performers and creators, have sort of pushed past those 2004 narratives. At least I hope we are, and we have. So some of it feels a little cringy 18 years in. But we still have a really, really, really long way to go.
Thank you. Virgie, your personal
Yeah,
experience?
I also grew up in a fat body and was deeply influenced by that. I think my relationship to the topic is more as a consumer of media and also a commentator on that media. So kind of like you mentioned, I mean, I write prolifically on the topic and representation. The representation and sort of the ways that it impacts how we see people and the ways that stigma shape those representations are kind of like what I do, my background. I have an academic background studying basically fat studies, so like how weight discrimination impacts gender, and it's kind of expanded from there. So thank you for having me.
Adrian?
Yeah, just like these ladies. I also have always been a fat person, fat child, fat adult, and it was, and then also because I was raised so I'm Puerto Rican, so I was raised in a Latino household, and that also brings an extra layer of being plus size, because it's kind of a catch-22 of you go to your grandmother's house or your aunt's house or whatever, and they're like, eat, and then they criticize you for being heavy set, and they're like, oh, you should wear a faja, which is like a body shaper and all that kind of stuff. And I've been wearing, because of that, I had been wearing fajas since I was in middle school. So it was something that it was just a mixed signal of what was right and what was wrong. And then in regards to career in acting, I did a lot of theater. I come from theater, and then I transitioned to TV and film in 2011. It took me that long because it was very, very hard to get cast or seen in television and film as an actor at that time period. And I was always told, oh, you should be, 100 pounds, you should look like J-Lo, you should look like Selma, they use the very, beautiful Latina women as an example, but that's not all Latina women or all women, period. And, you know, like 65% of women in the US are plus size. Do you know what I mean? So it took a while. And when I decided to make that change or that try in 2011 to do TV and film acting, I had a really great agent who believed in me. And one of the first things I auditioned for, and again, never had done TV and film, was always theater, I got a supporting role opposite Naomi Watts. And that was a validation of like, okay, you can do this, there is a place for you, go ahead and just trail forward. And, you know, it's been a mission of mine, and especially for my small indie production company, to represent the underrepresented and be body positive, represent the LGBTQI plus community, BIPOC, and then differently abled people. So we focus on works like that. And me personally, as an actor director, I do kind of gravitate towards those works. And I have never ever again will allow anyone to tell me that I can't do something, especially in this body. And I do feel it's very important to own the body you are in and believe in what you can do in that body. And I look back and I go, look how much I've done in this body. And so yeah, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for reaching out to me. Joy?
I'm Joy. I'm also fat, have been fat for many years. And the same thing, I think it took, I didn't feel entitled. The slogan of the Gina Davis Institute, if she, incident, whoa.
That's a whole
We
other
weren't
thing.
supposed to talk about that.
No, if she can see it, she can be it. And I didn't see it. And so I assumed that I was going to have to wait until I was at least 35 to play the parts that I'd been playing my whole life. Grandmothers, mothers, the principal, women of authority. And I kind of, I have regret about that. I feel like I squandered a lot of time by not putting myself out there and not even attempting, because I assumed that somebody would dismiss me. Yeah, so that was the main thing. There was something else I was going to say too. I can't remember. Oh, it was one of my first roles. I was on Twin Peaks, which David Lynch directed, and I was cast by a photograph. So that was such a life-changing experience to walk onto that set and have somebody with a resume like his to look at you like you're fascinating and perfect. And I had done nothing at that point. But he had such confidence in me, and that instilled in me the feeling that I belonged here, that I am important, and this is where I fit.
I'm getting teary already, and we just started. Okay.
I know, right?
So for the actors on the panel, can we talk about your experience being fat on camera? What have you loved? What have you hated? What roles are available? What are you seeing in the world of TV and film? Joy, would you like to start?
Sure. So Twin Peaks was one of my first things, and Dietland was one of my first credits also, and that was an utter dream. Like, I never imagined that I could be the star of a show in the body that I had about something I cared about. I never dared to dream that big. And that was a thing, like, I'm still getting over it. Like, I want there to be more. And I feel like a lot of the roles that I've played have to do with, I'm fat, but I'm a human being. And it's a song I'm happy to sing, but I've sung it already, and I'll sing it as long as it needs to be sung. But it'd be nice if we could just be people, like you were talking about earlier, like we are, and we can, yeah. Go ahead, I'm on a rant.
How about you, Adrian?
Yeah, I mean, and I can speak to also being behind the camera on this subject because I direct. And I've also worked for casting before, and I've also worked for a talent manager before. So one of the things that I've always noticed and realized is that in breakdowns, if you look through and you try to find anyone that describes a heavyset person, plus size, plump, fat, whatever the description, stout, whatever the description is, it's almost impossible to find. If my agents, which is why I dropped one of them, because if my agent would only focus on that descriptor, and they were only looking for either plus size or Latinx plus size, they would barely find it. Maybe I would audition once or twice a year, if at all, because of that description. Luckily, I have a manager who's fantastic and who sees past that and has submitted me for every kind of role, even if it doesn't say plus size or Latina, and I've booked because of that. And I've been the different person in the room because of that. And so there is still a need for a dramatic change. It's happening, but it's not as big as it should be by now, especially. And one of the things that I personally like to focus on is the fact that I'm plus size, but I don't live my life going, oh, my life, I'm plus size, I hate myself, blah, 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 blah. I function regular, I love regular, I'm married, I have a love life, that kind of thing. And I think it's really important to, yes, have shows that are featuring plus size women that maybe want to either lose weight or, because there's nothing wrong with that. Everyone's journey is different. Either they want to lose weight or they are finding their own in the body that they're in. That's great. However, I personally like to focus on material that has nothing to do with that. And I had just done a feature where I cast myself in it just to make a statement, because the film has nothing to do with me being plus size and nothing to do with me being Latina. And it's just a woman who happens to look like me, going through the situation she's going through. And there needs to be more of that. That's what I'd like to see, because it's just, again, nice that there is, hyper focus on women who either want to be happy with themselves or want to lose weight, great. But there's a ton of us who are like, well, we just live our lives. You know what I mean? And I would love to see stories like that. And I'd love to see more plus size superheroes. And I'd love to see more plus size leads in general that have nothing to do with them being plus size.
Yeah, and that's sorry, Ashley.
Oh, no, I'm just so glad to hear that you're making things, because I think actually that fat in front of the camera is important, because we are in a constant conversation with the rest of the world about television and film are how we talk to each other about our changing social understanding. And it has been historically, especially in America. And I'm so glad you're making work, because I think while being in front of the camera is important, that stuff comes from the top down. I know that when I read something that has a character that is designated as fat in it, and it is, there's just a read, you read one page of it and you're like, oh, this person doesn't even know any fat people. And if they do,
They hate them.
they hate them.
Right.
Right? You're like, oh, I don't need to. Thank you so much. Because it's true. It's a shorthand for a lot. It's a lazy shorthand and a trope for a lot of writers. And I would really love to get to the point where we could have nuanced conversations about actual fatness, because I don't mind talking about being fat. Obviously, it's not nearly the most interesting thing about any of us, but it doesn't even crack the top 10, I don't think, in any of these folks. But I would love to have conversations like, you can't tell anything about someone's health by their size. Positive, big numbers, small numbers, none of that matters. BMI is some racist BS. Numbers on a scale don't mean anything in terms of people's health. But even more so, we don't owe anyone our health, right? It's not for you to judge whether we're healthy or not to deserve the jobs. And then even further, I don't have to be body positive all the time to serve thin people that are making television and film and thin people that are watching television and film. I feel like sometimes I have to perform that. I don't know if you guys feel this, but I have to perform that because I have to be I'm a fat femme and I feel great about myself. So don't worry about the anti-fat bias that's being perpetuated towards me on the daily that interferes with my ability to survive. But also I can be anti-fat bias and have a very complicated relationship with my own thighs sometimes. Like, that's my right because I'm a human being. And I feel like sometimes relentless, I think we find ourselves forced into, well, at least you know what, I can only speak for myself. I find myself forced into a position of relentless body positivity sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm a person,
Yeah.
right? So I'm not always there, especially because things are not maybe made available to me that are available to straight-sized people. And that's what I'd like to see portrayed on TV. Not like me feeling, and Dietland went there. You know what I mean? Like, Dietland had that journey. And I would like to have enough, and I mean, I think this is a fact for like all sorts of people. We just don't have enough representation of different people, like people that are not white, cis, straight, able-bodied, right? Like, we just don't have enough. So we tend to put everything on the ones that we have, right? Like, you have three things. So we have to be all things. We have to be hot and smart and everything, you know? Meanwhile, you're fighting these tropes. Like when I did Black Klansman, and then I will shut up. It was really interesting because I portrayed this virulent, hideous, racist woman. And people were like, it was so funny. It was so funny. And I was like, there was nothing.
Wow.
Where'd you get that? And they were like, oh my God, when you were running.
Wow.
And I was like, I am running because I have placed a bomb in a black activist's mailbox. Right? But you saw a fat woman running.
Right.
And you were like, I don't have any framework for that, but funny. And that's the stuff that I'd really like to move forward with. And I'm really glad to be here and glad that the Institute lets us talk about this sort of stuff, frankly.
And that's really what, I mean, it's what the Institute is about in all of the dimensions that we look at. It's like showing real people, regardless of what they, you know, showing everybody in every role. It doesn't have to be just representing that particular identity. Can you tell, just because we're talking about experiences on camera, can you tell about your 30 Rock story that you were telling last night? Because I thought that was interesting.
So I went in, I'm in season 7 of 30 Rock for a minute. I am at the City Hall when Liz Lemon gets married. And it is me and another gentleman in like Mets gear going to get married. And we get called before her. But I auditioned, and everyone else that went in was very thin. And I was like, oh, I am the outlier in this audition. Because sometimes you go in and it's just like all the fat actresses, you know, and you're like, hey girl, hey. And then you show up and you're like, oh, they're trying something. Okay. Let's see. And so I managed to book that. But here's what's interesting is that the casting office, who I really like and who have been really kind to me throughout the years, were like, yeah, so we actually, funny story, we didn't audition a guy that fit you as your husband. And I was like, you say what? In what sense? And so what they did was Tina Fey went down and asked her editor, who had never been on camera in his life, to play my husband in that scene because they felt there is a shorthand when in a visual medium like television that they don't want to disturb. And I'll say one more thing really quickly, which is that my friend Tracy Thompson and I had a conversation years ago. I wonder if she'll remember this. I'm calling her name out. Where Tracy's younger than I am and very conventionally attractive, straight-sized black woman. And we were going in for all the same parts. Like I'd see her, I'd be like, okay. And it wasn't like maids. It was like medical examiners or judges or whatever. And after like the 10th time, Tracy and I were like, what is this about? We are not the same type. And then we realized it was characters that didn't have families. It was characters that didn't have romantic interests, right? Because And I can only extrapolate. And of course, my experience and the experience of a black performer are not the same. I do not equate that. But there is a thing where there was a time, certainly, where it felt like they would let one of us on. But like, if I'm fat, then I either have to have a fat family or a thin family, and they have to explain it. And neither of those things were things that anybody wanted to go through at the time. I don't know if that is anything that you guys have experienced.
100%. Yeah, which is why in the feature, why I don't always cast myself in the projects I do, but I mean, you know
I
what?
castrate Adrian Warren and everything.
You know what it is too, because I also look at it as a director standpoint of like, I want to serve the story, and I'll even write things with me in mind, and then by the end I'm like, actually no, I don't want to play this. I want someone else to play this. You know what I mean? So I really do work on projects with the story in mind. So if I don't fit, I'm okay with that. I personally am okay with that, because I'll even cast myself out. But with this, with the feature, and we're in post-production for, I cast, my opposite was tall, white, handsome guy. I never get cast with a tall, white, handsome guy. And I was like, why not? You know, like, why? My husband's a tall, white, handsome guy. You know, like for me, I was like, why not? Why can't I be cast? Because usually they'll try to find someone that, you know, is you know, shorter, heavier set or whatever, or trying to match me, I guess, because it looks realistic. But I know plenty of people and that are heavy set that their significant other is opposite, both men and women, right? And or any gender or gender fluid, anyone. So it definitely, in order to make that change, it's like, I don't want to wait for the studios and the networks to do it. So as an indie filmmaker, I'm making those changes, and hopefully something sticks and it gets into bigger festivals, and then those people will see that it is a possibility and it is okay, and it wasn't distraction throughout the whole film. You know what I mean? And those changes, unfortunately, eventually, and I joke about this, but it's true. Eventually, the people in the top, who are like the old white men that are still running the business, are going to die out. And, you know, the women and the people of color and everybody else who's making loud noises right now are going to rise up, and we're going to be okay. You know, it's going to take a little time, but it's going to happen. Those changes are going to happen. So yeah, but I feel you. It's the same kind of situation to being Latino. Because I've been into an audition room, and I obviously don't have an accent. Yes, I'm from the hood. I was born and raised in the hood. But I carry myself a certain way. And I've been in audition rooms where I go in and, you know, they're like, can you put in a little flavor? And I'm just like, flavor? I was like, I'm not spicy enough? Like, what's happening? You know? So it's like, between the fat situation and the Latin situation, you know, there's definitely a change happening. It's slower than I'd like it to be, but it's happening.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about being fat off camera. Queen Latifah recently came out about how much weight stigma has impacted her over her multi-decade career, even when she was getting work and being cast in central roles. Can we talk about the behind-the-scenes reality of being in a larger body and how it impacts the way plus-size people can navigate the world? Virgie, do you want to start out with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I had so many thoughts about what was being said. Like, I think about that, like, you know, I talked about this earlier today, but that whole narrative of, like, them pulling an editor who, you mentioned last night, like, was tall and shaved head and was, like, in a larger body, right? Right. Like, you know, I think they're like, we call that kind of like maybe like story continuity or something, but it's also about not threatening anybody.
Right. They don't want you to think about that, because then you miss the jokes.
Absolutely, totally. So I think there's like something there that's really interesting about kind of that. And yeah, I think from a storytelling perspective, it's like a distraction. Right. Yeah, but it's like but what's emotionally happening in the viewer is, I'm threatened and there's dissonance here,
Yes.
So it's like, anyway, but I sort of wanted to comment because I think that speaks to the behind the scenes. Like, I mean, the lived reality of plus size people is, and we've talked about this already, I think I alluded to it at least, is that there's a pretty massive like income gap between plus size women and straight size women. Straight size women and plus size women make anywhere from $9,000 to $19,000 less per year than straight size women. And like, what, you know, and researchers have gone in and looked at this disparity, and they found, I mean, I find it kind of like fascinating and a bit paradoxical or ironic, we might say, but like the reason is because plus size women are being pressured to be in physically oriented jobs, and straight size women are likelier to be in sedentary computer client facing jobs, like desk jobs. And the irony for me comes in this trope of like the lazy plus size woman, the slovenly. I'm like, no, the data show that plus size women are likelier to be on their feet all day, and thin women are likelier to be at a desk. And I think it's important, like, it's not about a value judgment, it's just about the data. Because again, data is weaponized against us every day. And I'm like, that data that's used, there's like, they've got 3 data points and I've got 5,000 that I've researched for the past 10 years that like, I know the truth. And all of this is like, it really is just discrimination and like smoke and mirrors. But other things are like medical discrimination. Like in general, plus size women, plus size people, but they have this data specifically for women, get screened for cancer less frequently than their straight size counterparts. We're less likely to get like mental health care. This is true across marginalized groups. Like queer people are less likely to get antidepressants than straight people. White people are more likely to get, you know what I mean? Like all, and these are across, you know, across the board, and we see this in other marginalized groups. I mean, another one is, and this is really staggering and heartbreaking, and I always hate sharing this one, but you know, there's this really important study that found that, you know, weight discrimination impacts life expectancy. And they went in and controlled for physical and psychological factors that might impact life expectancy, and they were able to isolate stigma. And it was likelier, and they did this, they sort of work with a bunch of marginalized groups, and the people who had the people who experienced weight stigma were the likeliest to die when they controlled for those other factors, which is just like terrifying, you know, and horrible. And so, you know, like there's that reality, right? I think when we're looking at like what fatphobia looks like, it's like, you know, there's less access to meaningful participation in society. And what does that look like? I mean, it looks like a spiritual, emotional, you know, isolation, which maps onto the physiology of the body. It's called minority stress. If you haven't heard of it, it's actually really interesting. Again, they've studied this across marginalized groups, but essentially, right, like stigma isn't just an emotional, isolated experience. It bakes its way into the body. People who experience stigma have like a decreased immune system. They're likelier to have chronic conditions, likelier to have like, you know, all kinds of really intense, like, you know, it just impacts every part of the body. And I think that sort of, that crossover is so important. And I think the last thing I want to say is, you know, when you look at the research, what we really know from the research is, generally speaking, human beings are born with something called a set point, which is the unique weight range in which their body performs at its best. And in general, the body consistently tries to get us back to that point. And so I think there's this mythology of kind of like conflating the conversation. Like one of the things I've noticed when I'm educating or lecturing or whatever is I'll be talking about human rights. Human rights. I'm like, I'm giving you all this information about these people, like how people in certain bodies are being treated in a way that is dehumanizing, and that this has real economic, medical impacts. And all you want to talk about is food and health. And I'm like, I don't know how, and I think what's frustrating is all of these conversations are conflated. The food conversation, the body conversation, the health conversation, the human rights conversation are all sort of like, they're conditional and they're all intermingled. And I think a lot of my work is separating out those things, and we need to separate out those things as a society, right? Like I think the last thing I want to share is like one of the tropes I've consistently seen in media is like the overeating like plus size person. And again, the research doesn't substantiate that either. Research finds that like plus size people and straight size people eat in a very like similar way. And in fact, plus size people may in fact be likelier to have an eating disorder because we're constantly being prescribed an eating disorder in medical settings. So I just think like, so that's kind of some of the behind the scenes stuff that I'm like really mad about and also interested in, yeah.
Does anyone else have something they want to say in response to that?
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's, and just to hear all the information that you just gave, and I realizing you're right, it's like how they intertwine everything, and it really is such a separation, and that's not talked about, and plus size people really are put in this one category.
Yeah. I think too, I think it is important to have fat directors, fat casting directors, all that, but just being fat is not the same as having a mindset that says I am a whole human being, as being radicalized. And I think, like, you can have a fat person who loathes themselves, and they're going to be really hard to work with. And I've been blessed to work with a lot of thin people who didn't think that I was flawed simply because I was fat. And I think that's even more important, like, because we're not a monolith. We all have different experiences and different beliefs, and yeah. I don't know.
And that's why we need storytellers to feature these stories.
Right.
Because people don't know this, you know. Do you feel like fat activism has had success within the entertainment industry so far? Or has there been movement? Let's put it that way. And I think you guys have touched on this a little bit.
I do think there's been movement.
Yeah.
I do, and I think I think it's been largely generated by fat activists. I would love to see the entertainment industry meet us somewhere. I think a lot of it is people saying, I will not do as an actor, I will not do this part as it stands. I will not lose weight to make this storyline happen. Also, I'm pretty excited about there's a sort of anti-fat suit movement.
Yeah.
Yes.
Suits, yeah.
I was just
Which
gonna
is
say that.
Huge. Listen, I wore a fat suit in 2004 to do Fat Pig, and I am now the size that I was, that the fat suit made me to be, which is awesome, right? Like, I think it's like hilariously delightful, because I do like where I said I like my body, but I am very aware of how damaging a fat suit can be because I was in one. You know what I mean? To the culture and to how it enforces, even in the wearer, really sort of dangerous thought patterns, right? Like, just as an example of my personal growth within the industry, I remember being a young actor who was fat in a fat suit for this play. And I would go out and talk to my friends in like December without a coat on Christopher Street in New York City because I wanted people to see that I was not the size that the suit made me. That was important to me as a 26-year-old. And I think when we allow fat to be a costume that people can take on and off without any of the lived experience behind it, and without an understanding of that, we are cheapening our storytelling. And we just need to get rid of them.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not like there's not enough talented fat actors out there, right? Like, and it's not like there's just a surplus of these stories being told, and we just don't have enough fat actors to, you know, let's suit some.
We looked so hard.
We looked so hard for them, just everywhere.
I mean, my theory was, I'm curious what you think about, my theory has been like, it allows the viewer to still be rooting for that thin person because they know that they can just take off that suit.
Absolutely.
And so that psychological game of like, it's not okay to root for a fat person in this culture, but I know that this person's actually thin, and it's okay to root for them as an actually thin person.
Right, and it's also dehumanizing, right? Like, you're like, I can be like, oh, what a transformation. especially when narratives feature weight loss. So you can always know that, like, Fat Thor, anybody? Right? You're like, oh, I see. The easiest way in these creators' minds to show that Thor has been depressed and had a hard time is to have him fat. And that just fills in all the years intervening. You know? I don't have anything else to say about that.
So people might be asking, how do I talk about this? How do I bring up this issue? Can they use the word fat? Yes.
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 Right?
Yeah.
Erin Dark, who was on Dietland with me, when we were doing press, she was like, is it okay if I use that word? And I was like, yes. and there was a time, Juliana Margulies was also in the show, and she was doing press and would use euphemisms for a while. And I remember the morning I saw her on like Good Morning America, and she said fat. Yeah, so proud of her. Because it's not an insult. You don't need to take care of me. When you say it neutrally without judgment, right. I feel like I can trust you. That's it.
And do you have advice for people who may want to bring up these issues?
In what content? Like
in the industry. So navigating the conversation on set.
It also can be touchy. I get that.
Yeah.
A person, like, because we're not a monolith, somebody might have a problem with that word. And if you just run up and say, hey, fatty, like, it might not go so well. But you can listen to people like you do with anyone and like mirror their behavior, you know? I don't know.
I think also like saying how I identify, like, because sometimes you're right. It's like in a way it's sort of like my queerness as well, where like you're like, are we doing? Is this a thing? You know what I mean? So like I sometimes take the burden on myself, and I'm like, hey, I'm Ashley, she, her, white, cis, fat, queer, you know, and like,
I like that.
Yeah, and just like lay it out, and then I'm like, and now you.
Yeah, because we're trying to take care of each other. Nobody's trying to hurt anybody.
Exactly, nobody's and also like it's really interesting with the euphemisms, right? Because sometimes you feel like they think it's a secret,
Right.
that you don't know about, that your fatness has like somehow eluded you, which is like so wild because it is the thing that is most constantly presented to you as like a reason for why something is or is not occurring in your life. But yeah, so like it's not a secret, and you can just ask. You know, like, how do you like to be, how do you identify? How do you like to be referred? Do you have any, you know, like, I'll just say I use fat. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, not everybody's there. And it's fine. We're all on a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, again, going back to writing parts for actors, I think it's important to... it's more so about the agents. I feel like it's more so about agents and managers to be able to see past a certain description and say, like, my actress is fantastic or my actor is fantastic, and I'm just going to submit them no matter what they are, because the agents and managers kind of work alongside with production and casting, and so making that conscious effort to do that and to do that for their clients. I feel like casting has definitely shifted and opened their minds to all of this. I mean, diversity, bodies, everything. There really has been a shift with casting, which is fantastic, because they are really the middle persons between the actors and production themselves. And if they advocate for us in that way, there will be some change, because ultimately you need more plus size people in lead roles to make it normal, right? And to make it, that's the easiest way to do this change. Because whatever we put in front of the audience, that will affect them and educate them. And yes, we're making TV and film for entertainment, but we're also doing it for education and to change the world in a more positive way, so that we're all, we all love each other, and we're all humans. We all want the same things, right? Like we all, no matter what walks of life we're from, we all want the same things for ourselves and for each other. And so just normalizing, and that can only happen if you continue putting it in front of people. Because a lot of the times they'll say, like, oh, the data says we should make this kind of film with these kind of actors because it was really popular. But data changes on a constant basis, and when you put something new in front of an audience, that data will change all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden, that's the most popular. So I wished Hollywood wouldn't hang so much, like Netflix, would hang so much on the data and only put TV and film productions that were in that little hole of what's worked before, and try something new. Because whenever they do, I don't know, in my opinion, whenever there is something new, it blows up.
Yeah, I'm excited to see
You know what
it.
I mean? And so that shift needs to happen. And again, the easiest way, in my opinion, is to cast leads as plus size actors, and yeah, the story could revolve around their weight, but most of the time it would really be lovely if it didn't. And then we could see some kind of change, not only in the industry but in everyday life.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, no, I just wanted to say really quickly.
And because you're data oriented, so you know more than I know about
She's
it.
like, I got data. Also, just like outside of the industry, support the fat people in your life. Like, recognize that, like, they are fighting a battle every day against anti-fat bias that impacts their ability to survive in the world. And just look out for them.
Right.
I mean, I was gonna say, like, I had a meeting the other day with, it's a production company called Exposure Labs, and they're like, they do films on climate change, they do films on toxic tech culture. They're sort of like a social awareness production company. And we were having a call. They do a lot of education and professional development with their team. And they had just done sort of a course, or like a session on awareness of like how to represent trans stories and trans bodies. And they're like, whatever our team is asking for, our team asks for someone to come in and talk about fatness. And so, and I do a lot of consulting with companies, like usually not production companies, but anyway, one of the questions that came up that kind of really shifted my whole paradigm, and I want to share it in this moment, because it's like, maybe we should be asking this question more, is, she asked in the meeting, she was like, what do we as storytellers owe our audience when it comes to representing these bodies? And I was like, what do storytellers owe? I'm like, you mean they're responsible to us? I'm like, I had never even literally, I'm not in the industry, like, directly, but it's like, I had never even, as like a consumer of media, thought, like, what responsibility? I'm like turning the camera around, or it's like turning the lens around, asking, what's your responsibility to this society? And I think that answer is like complex, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, do we want to create stories where, like, one of the things that boggles my mind is sort of like, I was looking at sort of the data on like how many, based on the population, is there a commensurate percentage of representation in media? The short answer is no.
Yep.
And the other thing, so I'm like, do we want visual media that is showing us the world that we live in? Is that the role of storytellers? I don't know, right? Like, obviously we're talking about futurity and like visions of a better future, right? Probably not. But like, that's a question. And then the other thing that I kind of found when I was looking at this research was like, just because the body count is there doesn't mean the humanity is there.
Yes. Yeah.
Like it was really shocking here on ageism, where like about 1 in 4 Americans is over the age of 65. There's actually a pretty commensurate percentage of representation, but most of the time it's making fun of aging. It's at the expense of the person who's the actor. And so I think that, I don't know, like that sort of stuff. But anyway, that question in that meeting really boggled my mind.
I don't know if you know this, Virgie, but one of the things we do at the Institute is we have a tool called Spell Check for Bias, where we actually work with companies around we look at scripts before they're even produced, around quantity and quality of representation in the 6 areas that we focus on, and we're working with most major studios now to pilot this
Love
program.
that.
That's great.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. So I have no, my Apple Watch was dead this morning. I have no idea where we are in terms of time.
Can I just say, I dream of a time where when I look at a billboard, and if I see all white faces, I think you couldn't find a single person of color to cast in this cast. I want it to be similar. I want it to be like you had to find all thin people. There's no body diversity. You couldn't find one person who's different. Like, that's what I want.
I'm going to even take it a step further. I want to be in a show with y'all.
Yeah.
I want there to be 2 fat people live that.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
You know?
Yeah.
My friend Morgan Gould, who's a writer, I don't know if you guys
Yes.
know Morgan. Morgan wrote a show called Three Fat Sisters, which is like a play on Three Sisters. But actually, the third one is not fat, and she has a moment where she's like, "I'm starting to think I might not be fat." Because Morgan's whole revolutionary dream was to have more than one fat woman on stage at a time. And it is sort of a thing, you know?
Yeah.
Because if you put more than one, they're like, is this a convention? You know?
So because I want to leave a little time for audience questions, I just want to give you all a chance to have one final thought. If you have one final thought you'd like to leave with the audience. Adrienne, would you like to start?
Yeah. I guess my final thought would just be piggybacking back to what I said originally, which was, as filmmakers here, I'm assuming everyone here is predominantly a filmmaker or wanting to go toward that direction, just be conscious about body representation in your work, and try to find those places where, as an actor, like in your story, where they can fit, but also behind the camera, you know. It's just something to be mindful of, and don't think that you need to have a story about a person losing weight or hating themselves or whatever to cast a plus-size actor. You could have a very amazing lead plus-size actor. And I've been through the festival circuit with another film, and I asked the audience, were you distracted? And like, just because I was curious of my own personal data, were you distracted that a plus-size actor like myself was the lead in this, and we didn't talk about that? And everyone said no. And it wasn't a thing, and I think that's really important to hear and to keep in mind for your future projects.
Yeah. Joy, your final thoughts?
That was kind of it. I want to see diversity all over the place. Yeah.
Virgie?
My final thought is, during this Q&A, do not ask about health. That's my final thought. Because that's always the first question, and I'm like, it's extremely offensive and dehumanizing. I'm just talking about human rights. So I'm going to get a little bit salty about that. Yeah.
Nice.
I'm like, the data are on our side on that topic, but also not discussing that right now.
For sure. Yep.
Ashley?
I really, I want to draw a line between body positivity and fat liberation. Fat liberation as a means of collective liberation is really important to me. Anti-fatness is a chair leg of white supremacy, and also of hypercapitalism. No one ever made any money off of telling you were good enough, you know? And just to keep all those things in mind. And thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody, for coming out. Do we
Having
have
us.
questions? Yes.
I make a question and a quick statement. You mentioned Fat Pig. I fell in love with that play when I first read it, and I got my manager to call this theater that was very, they did experimental things and non-traditional casting, and I was so excited, to see something on the page. And I was in my manager's office, and the casting director for the theater said, "Yeah, but she's black. A fat black person is not as surprise as a fat white person." also the other aspect of when you talk about, having attractive male lead, it's like the fat guy can have an attractive actress.
Correct, yeah.
But when they
Yeah.
it's like, and the fact that, I feel like that has like part of the data as well, documenting that where it's the colorism aspects of it and also the difference between the world accepting seeing a fat man, and having him become like a major star, versus a fat woman or having to have a skinny woman in a fat suit.
It is different for men, for sure. I mean, it's always been slightly different for men, even though men have their own battles too, because a lot of times they're the funny fat friend, and they don't get to be the leading guy, or they don't get to be like the superhero. So they have their own battle too. But it's a little bit harder for women, obviously, and for that reason exactly. But I feel like we're the people that can make that change, right? And so that's why we're
I think
here.
to your point, I think sometimes we're using the language of fat, but it's actually misogyny. It's actually anti-blackness. It's actually racism, and it's kind of this. It's like I do see it as like a smokescreen dog whistle word, where it's like you can't come up to somebody and just say like, "I think you're inferior because you're a woman," but you can say, "I'm not attracted to you because you're fat," right? Like it's like, and I think there is kind of a dog whistle component to the word fat, you know? And I really do think when you look at the history of the tropes that fat people experience, they're the exact same tropes that as we watch civil rights movements occur, exact same. Like literally the same tropes were being used against women. The same tropes have been used against people of color. Like people of color's bodies were medicalized just for being people of color. Women's bodies were just medicalized for being women. And this is now happening to fat people. They're literally the same. There's no difference. It's just hopping groups. Mm-hmm. So it's important to understand that like this, we might have this idea that I have an issue with like this body, but it's like that is mapping onto every previous liberation movement that has forced you to sublimate that and take on the language of whatever is acceptable at that time.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Diana, I just wanted to say really quick, like, that's so fascinating and messed up, and there is this, in the show, there is this sense that the lens through which the fat character is being viewed is like a willful turning their back on white supremacist concepts of conventional attractiveness. Like that it is important for this story, for this to be which is wrong, but that it's a white woman who who is like paralleled with another character, Jeannie, who is thin, and that this woman she has broken the rules by not doing all of the things that could have landed her in female white patriarchy paradise, and she didn't do it. But I'm disgusted to hear that. I'm so sorry.
Do we have time for one more question? Okay. Yes, go ahead. Let's do two more questions. Go ahead.
So just thank you for being here. Super appreciative of your honesty and your vulnerability. I'm also a public figure. I'm a fat athlete. How do you set boundaries? How do you, when you're on set, how do you make your needs known? Do you have advice for those of us navigating the workplace as fat women or as fat people?
I'm very blunt. I don't know. I'm very blunt. I say how I feel. I'm pretty much an open book. I'll kind of talk about any personal thing. Maybe my husband hates that, but so I'm not really afraid to say what I observe. That doesn't mean I'm not respectful. I'm very respectful, but I think just. You don't have to feel like, oh, should I? I think that's a woman thing too, a female thing too. That we're feeling like we have to apologize for things, or oh, let's just be nice, or let's care. Nah, yeah. You know what I mean? Like men haven't been that way for so long. Yeah. Sorry, guys, but yeah, guys don't really think about that. So I feel like why should we? So I think go forward with no apologies. Be respectful, obviously, but that also includes being respectful to yourself and true to yourself and what you believe in. And yeah, I don't know.
I personally, I'm not great at it. You saw me picking a chair here earlier. I can't. But watching other people, like you just reminded me, I was on Grey's Anatomy, and there was another actor who's also fat, and I just heard him say to the AD, he was like, do you have a longer stethoscope? This one is kind of high up here. Just because I think it is on us to ask, because they aren't on our bodies, and they don't intrinsically know what we need, but to politely ask for what you need, I think.
That's a great point too, that like, you're also, if you are in a position of power in these shows, like if you are number one on a call sheet, if you are setting a tone, and by advocating for yourself, you can also show others that they could advocate for themselves. I was on Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, and Alex Newell, who is an incredible performer and just a fantastic human being, was absolutely, we were around a table, and like moment one, Alex was like, nope, y'all gonna have to scoot back. Like, this is not enough room for humans.
Yeah.
And looked across the table at me
Yeah.
and was like, oh, just tell them to move back.
Yep.
You can't
Yeah.
get into that table.
Exactly.
You know? And I was like, oh, right, I can ask for these things.
Yeah.
And I can set these boundaries. And I think you can be kind and firm.
I mean, well, the boundary I'm thinking of is sort of internal, where it's like the shift away from this is my fault to like you're a bigot. And I think like, and I think back on, I mean, a great example is like, at this point, and I had this mind shift like a few years ago, and like, you know, I was like, oh, like if someone came up to me and said, like read me as a woman and was like, clearly you can't drive because you have a uterus, I would be like, LOL, like where are you from, 1980, like 1905 or whatever, right. And I'd be like, LOL, this is ridiculous, like shut up, right? And I was like, I can have that about my fatness. I'm like, you are being a piece of shit. I'm just being. You are opting into bigotry. And I think the other thing that the fascinating thing about bigotry is like there's enormous asks on the target of the bigot with invisibilizing that you, like, I'm like, you're asking me to transform my entire life to make you comfortable, whatever mechanisms you've been told that I should undertake to become a thin person, which is massive amounts of effort, massive amounts of years, and an eating disorder as a naturally larger bodied person. You're totally fine demanding anorexia of me, and yet you could stop being a bigot right now. Like, I can't be a thin person right now, but you can stop being a bigot right now. Right. And so I think there is this real blame paradigm on like, why are you making me uncomfortable? Why are you doing this thing? Why, like, and it's like, you are electing into maintaining a system that is deeply problematic. And I will say so I think taking on that shift, and it doesn't feel natural at first because we really have been taught to take on the blame for being in a larger body, for experiencing stigma. Again, I think for me, historically contextualizing, women felt this exact way for years, and many still do, right? People of color have been forced to feel this way. We are not alone. Trans people, disabled people. Like, we don't want them to feel, like, I mean, like, right, like, I occupy multiple marginalized, and I'm like, I don't want anybody else to feel that way either, and I can't be feeling that way about being fat if I'm like, if I'm fiercely defending like my right to be a person of color, my right to be like a femme or a woman or whatever, like, you know, I have to have that about my fatness too. And it felt so, when I thought about it, I was like, oh, this is so intuitive, but it was so, because the stigma blocks us from that realization. Oh, yeah. The last thing I'm gonna say about internal boundaries is I also had a shift where I was like realizing that people who are deep in, whether it's internalized fat phobia or they're practicing fat phobia, not as fat people, I mean, at this point, I'm like, you are wounded and you are triggered. And like, I'm sorry that you're wounded and triggered. I'm okay. Like, you are having a moment. Like, and it used to be, like, for me, whenever somebody would like have a fat moment or like a dieting moment, they would have fat shame moment, I would hop on the train with them and just be on that runaway train. And now I'm like, oh, you're fully triggered in the same way that like, so, and I really like, it is triggered because fat phobia is fucking trauma that all of us carry in our body. And I've learned how to self-regulate my trauma because I know what it is, I know how it works, and I'm like taking care of myself. And if your fat phobia is like out of control, in the same way that if someone was like fully triggered in an episode that was unrelated to social stigma, I would be like, I need to like either take care of myself or I'm like, what do you need right now? Because I'm okay and you're fully set the fuck off, right? And I think like that like not seeing dieting and thin like stuff, like thin sort of centric mentality as like inspiration, seeing it as a trigger. I'm like, oh, you're triggered from your trauma of being like learning fat phobia as a child. I did too. And so I think like that mind shift of like, oh my God, you're in a trauma response right now. Versus like, I'm inspired to lose weight. I'm like, you're triggered. I don't want to be triggered with you. Anyway, so those are my internal boundary things. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry, we do have to wrap, but you can come down. But if you want to come down and ask questions, that would be great. I want to thank my panelists. You guys are awesome. And I really want to thank the Film Festival for having this panel for the first time this year. Yeah, so thanks everyone.